My name is Clara. I am 36 years old, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Denver, Colorado. On the outside, my life might look simple and even comfortable. I work as an office administrator at a small insurance firm. I keep to myself. I have a modest apartment that I keep neat and tidy. I am not flashy, not dramatic, not someone who constantly seeks attention. But what happened to me on my 10th wedding anniversary changed me forever. It was the moment that split my life in two, the life I had before, and the life I had after. I had been married to Ethan for exactly 10 years. We were both 36, the same age, and we had met in our mid-20s when everything still felt new and possible. When I married him, I believed in the fairy tale, love, children, family dinners, growing old together. Over the years, reality was harder than I expected. We struggled to have children, and the weight of that battle pressed on us daily. I was diagnosed with fibroids, which made it difficult. But still, I tried. I endured surgeries, medications, endless doctor visits. I cried quietly in the bathroom after every negative test, but I kept moving, believing that one day things would turn around. By our 10th anniversary, things between Ethan and me were strained but not broken, at least, that is what I thought. I believed we were still in this together. That morning, I woke up determined to make the evening special, to remind him of us, and of why we started. I took a half day off work. At lunch, I drove 30 minutes across town to a boutique wine shop to get his favorite red wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. Ethan wasn't a heavy drinker, but he loved a glass of this wine on special occasions. From there, I went to a butcher shop and asked for the best cut of Wagyu short ribs. It was expensive, but I wanted him to know I cared. I came home and started preparing. I wasn't the world's best cook, but I followed recipes carefully, seasoning, marinating, doing everything I could to make it perfect. I strung lights across our balcony, ironed an ivory tablecloth, and polished the silverware until it shone. I even picked up a small custom cake that morning. White vanilla frosting, simple, elegant. On top, written in chocolate letters, Happy Anniversary and Birthday, Ethan. By 7 o'clock, I slipped into a soft blue dress Ethan once said was his favorite. I put on light makeup and a spritz of perfume. I sat down, waiting for the sound of his keys at the door. 7:30 came. No sound. At 8, I lit the candles on the table. The food was warm, the wine was opened, and I kept checking my phone for a text. Nothing. At 8:30, I sent him a message. Dinner is ready. I'm waiting. No reply. At 9, I called. The phone rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I tried again 15 minutes later. Same result. By 9:30, the candles were melting into puddles, and the food had grown cold. I sat at the table, staring at the clock, each second pounding louder in my ears. My chest felt tight, but I kept telling myself, maybe he's stuck in traffic. Maybe something came up at work. Maybe he's about to walk in right now with an apology. At 10:35, my phone buzzed. A notification popped up. My heart leapt. It was an email from Ethan. Not a call. Not even a text. An email. It read, "Sorry. Big client emergency. Have to stay at the office. We'll make it up to you later." That was it. No happy anniversary. No happy birthday to me, let's celebrate later. No thank you. Nothing. Just a cold one-line excuse that felt more like a dismissal than an apology. I set the phone down and stared at the untouched dinner. The ribs were stiff, the wine sat half-poured, and the cake in the fridge remained sealed in its box. I reached for the napkin I had folded so neatly for him and held it in my hand until it wrinkled. Something inside me shifted that night. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I felt something crack quietly in my chest. I felt myself slipping from hope into a numbness I couldn't explain. At midnight, I put everything away. I boxed up the food, blew out the candles, and took down the lights. The apartment looked as if nothing had happened. As if no celebration had ever been planned. I went to bed still wearing the wrinkled dress I had picked out for him. The perfume lingered on my skin, but it felt wasted. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the words of his email replaying in my head like a dull blade cutting again and again. Big client emergency. We'll make it up later. I whispered to myself, later never comes, does it? And with that thought, I closed my eyes. But deep inside, a cold suspicion began to form. Something told me this wasn't just about work. Something told me my husband's absence that night was the start of something much bigger. I thought maybe it was just one bad night. But the truth? It was the beginning of the end. And the way he would leave me, no one deserves to be abandoned like that. What would you do if your spouse completely ignored your wedding anniversary? Would you forgive, or would it break something inside you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more sweet revenge stories like this. The morning after my anniversary disaster, I woke up with swollen eyes. Not from crying, but from exhaustion. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that short, cold email on repeat. At work, I forced myself to smile when coworkers asked how I was doing. I told them Ethan had been busy with a client, but inside I felt like I was standing on quicksand. Still, I tried to brush it off. He'll make it up. He has to. That's what I told myself. But the days rolled by. 1, 2, 3. No flowers. No text. No call. Not even a simple sorry. He came home late, ate quietly, showered, and went straight to bed. It was like I wasn't even there. Then came day 7. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, folding laundry, when I heard a knock at the door. My heart jumped. Finally. Maybe he had gone all out, flowers, an apology, maybe even a surprise to make up for everything. I opened the door, my lips ready to form a shaky smile. But it wasn't Ethan. It was a man in a gray suit, carrying a briefcase. "Mrs. Clara James?" he asked. I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. "Yes." He cleared his throat and handed me a thick envelope. "I'm Ethan's attorney. I was instructed to deliver these to you." I froze, staring at the envelope. My hands wouldn't move. He shifted uncomfortably. "It's the paperwork. You'll find everything explained inside." I finally took it from him, my fingers trembling. "Where's Ethan?" I whispered. The lawyer avoided my eyes. "He asked me to handle this on his behalf. He won't be returning here." The words hit me like a slap. I must have looked pale because the lawyer hesitated, almost as if he wanted to say something comforting, but then thought better of it. "Good day, Mrs. James." He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking against the hallway floor until the sound disappeared. I shut the door slowly and leaned against it, the envelope heavy in my hands. For a long time, I couldn't open it. I just stood there, staring at it, as if the paper itself might burn me. Finally, I forced myself to the kitchen table and tore it open. Inside were divorce papers. The reason listed was brutal in its simplicity, irreconcilable differences stemming from the inability to have children. My stomach turned. I read it over and over. Inability to have children. That's what my 10 years of marriage had been reduced to. Not memories. Not love. Not the years of trying, crying, holding each other after failed tests. Just a single line, blaming me. There was also a short typed letter from Ethan attached. No warmth. No affection. Just facts. "Clara, I want children. After 10 years, it's clear this isn't possible with you. I've decided to move forward. Please sign the documents and return them promptly. That was it. No explanation. No conversation. No goodbye. I dropped the papers on the table and covered my mouth with my hands. My chest felt like it was caving in. The house was silent, but in my ears, a roar was building. Memories crashed over me, all the nights I had cooked, waiting for him to come home. All the mornings I had taken pills to manage my fibroids. The surgeries. The hope. The disappointment. And through it all, Ethan had acted as though he was by my side. And now I saw the truth. He had been waiting for the moment he could discard me. Like I was nothing more than a broken vessel that failed to give him what he wanted. I sat there until the sun went down, the papers lying untouched in front of me. At one point, I laughed bitterly through my tears. 10 years, and this is how it ends? Through a lawyer? I didn't sleep that night either. I kept hearing the echo of the lawyer's words, "He won't be returning here." Not even to look me in the eyes. Not even to face the woman he had once promised forever to. The next morning, I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and stared at the papers again. My hands trembled when I touched the pen. But I didn't sign them. Not yet. I needed time. Time to understand how my husband could vanish so easily. Time to ask myself if the problem was really me, or if the truth was much darker. And deep down, I sensed something I couldn't yet prove. Ethan's reason for leaving wasn't the whole story. It was only the beginning. I thought my infertility was the reason he left. But years later, I would discover the truth: Ethan wasn't just running from me. He was running from himself. What would you do if your spouse sent you divorce papers through a lawyer instead of facing you directly? Would you sign right away or fight for answers? Also, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The days after receiving those divorce papers blurred together like watercolors bleeding on a page. I went to work, I answered emails, I smiled when my coworkers asked simple questions, but inside, I was hollow. At night, I would sit at the dining table, staring at the envelope. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. Ethan's typed letter repeated itself in my mind until it felt carved into my skin: "I want children." After 10 years, it's clear this isn't possible with you. I told myself not to cry. I told myself to stay strong. But some nights, when I turned off the lights and crawled into the cold side of the bed where Ethan used to sleep, the tears came anyway. They soaked into the pillow as quietly as possible, as if I was still trying to hide my pain from him, even though he was already gone. The whispers started too. Neighbors asking where Ethan was. Friends from church hinting at whether we were all right. And the worst of all, the pitying looks. I hated those. They didn't have to say the words. I could read it in their eyes. Poor Clara. Couldn't give her husband children. Now he's gone. It was like everyone silently agreed that my worth had been tied to something I couldn't control. That my body had betrayed me, and therefore, I had betrayed him. One evening, about a week later, I opened the fridge and saw the cake still sitting there. The one I had ordered for our anniversary. White frosting, smooth and perfect, with the words written neatly across the top: "Happy anniversary and birthday, Ethan." I stood there staring at it until my vision blurred. Then, without thinking, I grabbed it with both hands, walked it straight to the trash, and shoved it in. The box smashed against the sides of the bin, frosting smearing the cardboard. I sank to the kitchen floor and let out a sound I can't even describe, not quite a scream, not quite a sob. Something raw and broken. That night, I realized the marriage wasn't just over. Something inside me was over too. I didn't sign the divorce papers right away. They sat on the table for days, haunting me. Every time I passed by, I would stop and stare at them, hoping for some hidden line I had missed, some explanation that would make it make sense. But there was nothing. Just the cold words of a man who had once promised to love me in sickness and in health. After 3 days of this, I picked up the pen. My hands trembled, but not from fear anymore. From anger. From betrayal. From the bitter truth that I would not beg a man to stay who had already packed his pride and left. I signed. When the pen left the paper, I sat back and stared at my name written at the bottom. It didn't even look like my handwriting. It looked like the signature of someone else, someone harder, someone who had no choice but to survive. The next morning, I slid the papers into an envelope and mailed them back. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not even my closest friend. I wanted to keep my shame private. But deep inside, I had a quiet thought. A stubborn ember that refused to go out. If he could walk away without looking back, then maybe, just maybe, I could learn to walk forward. It wasn't strength yet. It wasn't healing. But it was the first time in days I felt the faintest spark of something that wasn't despair. I thought my story ended with that signature. That I was just the woman discarded for her broken body. But years later, I would learn Ethan's betrayal wasn't what it seemed. And the truth would shake everything I thought I knew. After I signed those papers and sent them off, my life fell into a kind of rhythm that didn't feel like living, more like existing. You know that feeling when the world keeps spinning, the sun still rises, but inside you're stuck in this frozen place where time doesn't move? That was me for months. I went to work. I came home. I cooked simple meals for one. And I sat in silence. The walls of the apartment echoed differently without Ethan's shoes by the door, without his voice drifting from the living room, without the sound of him slamming his laptop shut after a late-night call. At first, I thought the silence would crush me. But little by little, I started to notice something else. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. No passive-aggressive comments about the dust on the shelves. No sighs when I reheated leftovers instead of making a fresh meal. No cold stares when I asked how his day went and he muttered fine without looking at me. For the first time in 10 years, I could breathe in my own home. But healing? Healing didn't come fast. It came like drops of water wearing down stone. Slowly. Imperceptibly. Until one day, you look back and realize the edges have softened. Still, there were nights I couldn't sleep. Nights when I replayed Ethan's words in my head. You're no longer the wife I need. Those words became a knife I sharpened myself over and over. Sometimes I'd stand in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My body. My belly. The scar from the fibroid surgery I'd had 2 years before. I'd press my hand against it and whisper, "You didn't fail. You didn't fail." But some nights, I didn't believe it. Months turned into a year. Then 2. My friends stopped asking how I was doing. My coworkers stopped tilting their heads in sympathy when they saw me at my desk. Life marched on, and I learned to march with it. But I never remarried. I wasn't ready. And I wasn't sure if I ever would be. Then, one Saturday morning, an email popped up in my inbox. The subject line was simple, Class of 2000 to 20-year reunion. I almost laughed out loud. 20 years since high school? Had it really been that long? At first, I deleted it. I had no interest in standing in a room full of old classmates pretending life had been perfect. But that night, lying in bed, I thought about it again. About the girl I used to be before Ethan, before marriage, before fibroids and doctors and cold words that cut like glass. What would she say if she saw me now? The more I thought about it, the more a strange curiosity bubbled inside me. Maybe it was time to step out of my little circle of survival. Maybe it was time to see who else had stumbled, who else had scars. So 2 weeks later, I found myself driving to the old gymnasium that had been transformed into a reception hall. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror as if I'd find courage staring back at me. I wore a simple navy blue dress. Nothing flashy. Just enough to remind myself I still had a spine, that I still had dignity. When I walked inside, the noise hit me like a wave, laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses. A banner hung above the entrance, "Welcome back, class of 2000. For a moment, I froze. Everyone looked so different. Older, yes, but also more polished, more confident. Like they had figured life out in ways I hadn't. I almost turned around. But then I heard a voice. "Clara?" I turned, and there he was, Daniel Hughes. If you had told me in high school that Daniel Hughes would still recognize me 20 years later, I would have laughed. He'd been one of the nice guys, the kind who played basketball but also helped carry instruments for the band kids after practice. He was the kind of guy you remembered for being kind, not flashy. Now, he stood in front of me, taller than I remembered, with a bit of gray in his beard and kind eyes that hadn't changed a bit. "Daniel?" I said, surprised. He grinned. "Wow. It's really you. You look," he paused, searching for the right word. "Like you've lived." I blinked, then laughed. It wasn't the kind of compliment I was used to, but somehow, it felt more genuine than any "you look beautiful" I'd heard in years. We ended up sitting at a small table tucked away in the corner. And as the night wore on, the noise of the reunion faded into the background. He told me about his life. How he'd married young, had 2 kids, then gone through a painful divorce when his wife left him for someone else. He'd raised his daughter, now 16, mostly on his own. And then he asked me about Ethan. For a moment, I hesitated. Shame tried to creep in. But then I thought of the silence in my apartment, the peace I'd built brick by brick, and I said it. He left me. After 10 years. Said it was because I couldn't give him children. Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't look at me with pity either. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "Then he's a fool." Something in my chest cracked open at those words. We talked until the DJ played the last song. When I got in my car to drive home, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying Ethan's words in my head. I was replaying Daniel's. "Then he's a fool." Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I started meeting for coffee. At first, it was casual. Just 2 old classmates catching up. But slowly, those conversations deepened. He asked me things no one else had bothered to ask. How I was sleeping. If I still painted, like I used to in high school. What my dreams were now, not 10 years ago. And for the first time, I let myself answer honestly. I told him about my fibroid surgery, about the pain of thinking my body had failed me. I told him about Ethan's silence, about the lawyer who showed up instead of a husband brave enough to face me. Daniel listened. Really listened. Not with advice, not with solutions, but with presence. One evening, as we walked out of a cafe, he turned to me and said, "Clara, you know there's nothing wrong with you, right? You didn't fail." He did. Because a man who leaves instead of loving, that's failure. I swallowed hard. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I nodded. That night, I lay in bed and whispered the words to myself like a mantra. He failed. Not me. It was a small shift, but it was everything. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel and I grew closer. Not in a whirlwind, not in a rush, but like 2 rivers slowly meeting, finding their way toward each other. One afternoon, he introduced me to his daughter, Grace. She was shy at first, but when she found out I loved to paint, her eyes lit up. We spent the afternoon sketching flowers at the park. When she hugged me goodbye, something warm spread through my chest. It wasn't motherhood in the traditional sense. But it was connection. And it was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. And just when I thought my story had finally found a new rhythm, that's when life decided to twist the knife one more time. Because 3 years after Ethan left me, I opened Facebook one morning, and there it was. A wedding photo. Ethan, standing at the altar, beaming like a man who had never known pain. Beside him, Vanessa. The caption read, "Celebrating 3 years of marriage and the upcoming arrival of our little one." My hands trembled as I stared at the photo. A baby. After all the years of blaming me, after walking away because I couldn't give him children, there he was. Smiling beside a woman cradling her belly. For a moment, the old shame came rushing back. But then I looked at the date. 3 years. Which meant he had remarried less than a year after leaving me. And deep inside, a voice whispered, "This story isn't over." Not yet. I thought Ethan had gotten everything he wanted. A new wife. A baby on the way. But life has a way of revealing truths you can't hide forever. And when the truth about Ethan finally surfaced, it changed everything. It was a Sunday morning in early spring. The sun was streaming through the blinds, and I had just finished watering the little potted herbs on my balcony. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone. That's when it happened. A notification popped up on Facebook, "People you may know." I almost swiped past it. But then my breath caught. There, in the suggestion box, was Ethan. My ex-husband. For a split second, I froze. My finger hovered over the screen, and my heart began to race. I hadn't seen his face in years, not since the day I signed those divorce papers and watched the lawyer's shoes disappear down the hall. Against my better judgment, I clicked. And there it was. His profile, bright and polished, like nothing had ever happened. A clean-shaven smile, a tailored suit, one arm wrapped around a woman I instantly recognized. Vanessa. My chest tightened. She was holding her stomach in the photo, cradling a round belly in a fitted white dress. The caption burned into my mind. "Celebrating 3 years of marriage and the upcoming arrival of our little one. Blessed beyond measure." I dropped the phone onto the table and covered my mouth with my hand. 3 years. That meant he had married her less than a year after leaving me. The math was undeniable. He had been planning this all along, hadn't he? For a moment, old shame came flooding back. My throat tightened as memories of doctor visits, of fibroid treatments, of nights I had cried into my pillow whispered back. He left you because you couldn't give him children. And now look, he has one with her. I sat there, trembling, coffee growing cold in front of me. Eventually, I forced myself to pick up the phone again. I scrolled. Photo after photo of Ethan and Vanessa filled the screen. Vacations in Hawaii. Dinners at fancy restaurants. Ethan in a sharp suit with his arm proudly around her, and in almost every caption, he wrote about family, about fatherhood, about finally living his true calling as a husband and soon-to-be father. Each word felt like a knife pressed against my ribs. I whispered to myself, "So that's it. That's the life you wanted. That's the life I wasn't good enough to give you." For days after, I couldn't get those images out of my head. I went through my routines, work, dinner, calls with Daniel, but deep inside, I felt raw. Finally, one night, I broke. I called Sophie, my old friend from high school, the one who had stuck by me through thick and thin. She answered on the second ring. "Clara. It's been forever. How are you?" I hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. "Sophie, you're not going to believe this. I just saw Ethan on Facebook. He's remarried. And they're having a baby." There was silence for a moment on the other end. Then Sophie sighed. "Clara, I'm sorry. That must feel like a punch in the gut." "It does," I admitted. "It feels like everything you blamed me for was true. Like maybe I really was the problem all along." Don't say that, Sophie snapped gently. You know that's not true. He's the one who walked away. He's the one who couldn't even face you. That says more about him than it ever did about you. I swallowed hard. Then why does it feel like proof? Proof that he was right? Because that's how betrayal works, she said softly. It convinces you to carry guilt that was never yours. Her words sank into me, but the ache didn't go away. The following week, Daniel noticed something was off. We were sitting at a little Italian restaurant he liked. Grace had gone to a friend's birthday party, so it was just the two of us. You're quiet tonight, he said gently, twirling his fork through pasta. I poked at my food and sighed. I saw Ethan online. Daniel leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. And he's remarried. 3 years now. His wife's pregnant. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. He just tilted his head and said, "And you think that means what, exactly?" I stared at him. Doesn't it mean he was right? That he really just wanted children and I couldn't give him that? Daniel set down his fork, his eyes steady on mine. Clara. Listen to me. A man who wants children doesn't vanish through a lawyer. A man who loves you doesn't throw away 10 years of marriage without even speaking to you. What he did wasn't about kids. It was about him. I bit my lip, fighting back tears. Then why does it still hurt so much? Because you're human, he said quietly. And because you loved him. But love doesn't make someone right. It just makes their betrayal hurt more. For the first time that evening, I let the tears fall. Daniel didn't say anything more, he just reached across the table and took my hand. And in that simple gesture, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. But the story didn't end there. Because as the weeks passed, the picture-perfect facade of Ethan and Vanessa's life began to crack. It started with whispers. Little things I heard through mutual acquaintances, old classmates who had reconnected at the reunion. Did you hear about Ethan? Apparently, Vanessa was seen with someone else before the baby was born. I pretended not to care, but my heart beat faster. Another week, another whisper. I think Ethan's struggling. Someone said the baby might not even be his. I tried to push it aside. I told myself it wasn't my business anymore. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, those words echoed. The baby might not even be his. I pressed my hand against my chest, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. After everything he had said to me. After the way he left. After the way he blamed me, branded me as the reason he couldn't have a family, he had gone and built his shiny new life on a lie. And now it was crumbling. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. For the first time since signing those divorce papers, I felt something that wasn't sadness or shame. It was vindication. Ethan thought he had finally won. A new wife. A baby. The perfect life. But the cracks in his story were only the beginning. The truth that came next would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself, and about me. If your ex remarried quickly and then their new relationship started falling apart, would you feel pity or satisfaction? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you are enjoying this story. When Sophie told me that Vanessa had cheated, that the baby might not even be Ethan's, I didn't know what to feel at first. My emotions tangled together like threads knotted in a ball: anger, disbelief, satisfaction, even sadness. For so many years, Ethan had made me feel like I was the problem. He let me carry the shame of our childlessness. He let me cry alone in doctors' offices, whispering apologies for things I couldn't control. And then he abandoned me, claiming he wanted a family, only to chase one with someone else. And now, that picture-perfect life was cracking wide open. I told myself to let it go. To not feed the part of me that wanted to know every juicy detail. But the truth? I couldn't stop thinking about it. That week, I went through the motions at work, but my mind was somewhere else. During lunch breaks, I caught myself staring out the window, imagining Ethan's face when he found out. Did he feel the same kind of betrayal I had felt? Did his stomach drop the way mine had when the lawyer showed up at my door? I wanted to know. So one evening, I called Sophie again. "All right," I said the second she answered, "tell me everything. Don't hold back." She sighed, but I could hear the thrill in her voice. Sophie always loved being the one with the inside scoop. "Okay, but you didn't hear it from me." "I promise," I said quickly. "Word is," she began, lowering her voice even though we were on the phone, "Vanessa was seeing someone else before the baby was born. Some guy from her art gallery. A younger man, apparently. Tall, dark hair, kind of bohemian, you know the type." I closed my eyes, shaking my head. Of course. Anyway, Sophie continued, the whispers started when people did the math. The timeline of the pregnancy doesn't line up with when she and Ethan were officially together. People are saying the baby doesn't even look like Ethan. And he knows it. He's furious, Clara. Humiliated. I let out a bitter laugh. Humiliated. That's rich. Don't tell me you feel sorry for him, Sophie teased. No, I said quickly. I don't. But I know that feeling. That moment when the floor drops out from under you and you realize the person you trusted was lying all along. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Not even him. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then Sophie said softly, "You've got more grace than I would." Maybe. Or maybe I had just lived through enough pain to know there was no satisfaction in seeing someone else drowning in the same water. Still, a small part of me couldn't help but feel vindicated. A week later, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was out in the open. One evening, as I was scrolling absent-mindedly on Instagram, I stumbled across a post from one of Ethan's old coworkers. The caption was vague, but the comments were not. "Poor guy. Can't believe she did that to him. He deserves better." Guess karma really comes full circle. My heart pounded as I clicked through the thread. Story after story, comment after comment, all pointing to the same truth: Vanessa's affair was no longer a secret. Everyone knew. And Ethan? He was the punchline. That night, Daniel came over. We were supposed to watch a movie, but I couldn't keep it in. "Daniel," I blurted out as soon as he walked through the door. "It's true. Vanessa cheated. The baby isn't his." He raised his eyebrows but didn't look surprised. He set down the takeout bag he was carrying and shrugged. "Figures." I blinked. "That's all you're going to say? Figures?" Daniel gave me a small smile. "Clara, what did you expect? Men like Ethan, they think they're building castles, but really they're just piling sand. All it takes is one wave, and it's gone." I sank onto the couch, shaking my head. I don't know how to feel. Part of me wants to laugh. Part of me wants to scream. And part of me feels nothing at all. Daniel sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his shoulder. "That's because you've already done your grieving," he said gently. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about him reaping what he sowed." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I realized how different he was from Ethan. Where Ethan had been cold, Daniel was steady. Where Ethan had been all surface, Daniel was depth. I leaned back and whispered, "Do you think he regrets it? Leaving me?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Clara, even if he does, it doesn't matter. Regret doesn't erase what he did. And it doesn't change who you are." I nodded slowly, his words sinking in. But that night, after Daniel left, I couldn't help myself. I pulled out an old shoebox from the back of my closet. Inside were scraps of my old life, photos, letters, little mementos of a marriage that had once been real to me. I held a picture of Ethan and me on our honeymoon. We looked so young, so full of promise. I traced the edge of his smile with my finger and whispered, "Was any of it real?" Then I thought about Vanessa. About her standing at the altar in her white dress, smiling like she had one. About the way she must have thought she had secured the perfect life, wealth, status, a husband who left his wife for her. And now? Her perfect life was nothing but smoke and mirrors. I tucked the photo back into the box and pushed it deep into the closet. For the first time, I didn't feel like the abandoned wife anymore. I felt like the survivor. Still, the story wasn't done. Because soon, another truth would come to light. A truth that had been buried for years. And when I discovered it, everything I thought I knew about why Ethan left me, about why he divorced me, about why he branded me as the problem, would shatter into pieces. I thought Vanessa's affair was the twist. That watching Ethan's perfect life crumble was the end of the story. But the real truth, the one that had been hidden from me all along, was about Ethan himself. If your ex was cheated on by the person they left you for, would you feel justice was served, or would you feel pity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. After the whispers about Vanessa's affair became undeniable, I thought that was the end of the story. I thought karma had already spun its wheel and landed squarely on Ethan's back. But life has a way of saving the sharpest knife for last. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was leaving work, my bag slung over my shoulder, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie. "Call me as soon as you can. You won't believe what I just heard." My stomach tightened. Sophie's messages always carried weight, but this one felt different. Urgent. I stepped into my car, shut the door, and dialed her number. She picked up instantly. "Clara," she said, her voice low, like she was about to confess a secret. "Are you sitting down?" "I'm in my car," I said cautiously. "What's going on?" She took a breath. "It's Ethan. I was talking to an old friend of mine who works in the medical field. And apparently, he's always had a low sperm count." For a moment, I didn't understand. My brain struggled to piece the words together. "What do you mean, always?" "I mean," Sophie said carefully, "the doctors told him years ago. Long before he left you. He knew." The phone nearly slipped out of my hands. My pulse thundered in my ears. "He knew?" I whispered. "Yes," Sophie said. "Clara, he knew it wasn't just you. It wasn't your fibroids, or your body. It was him. And instead of telling you, he let you carry the blame." My vision blurred with tears. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. All those years. All those nights crying alone, apologizing for my body, begging God to fix what I thought was broken in me. And the whole time, Ethan had been carrying his own secret, one he was too ashamed to admit. I sat there in stunned silence while Sophie's voice floated through the phone. "Clara? Are you still there?" I forced out a shaky laugh, though it came out more like a sob. "I spent 10 years thinking I was the problem. 10 years, Sophie. And he knew?" "Yes," she said firmly. "He knew. And instead of being honest, he let you drown in guilt that wasn't yours." I closed my eyes, the memories flooding back like a cruel montage. Ethan sitting silently in the doctor's office, not asking questions. Ethan brushing off discussions about treatments, telling me to relax. Ethan staring at me coldly when I mentioned adoption. It all made sense now. He wasn't indifferent because he didn't care. He was indifferent because he already knew the truth, and he didn't want it revealed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. His words, his silence, his betrayal. I want children. After 10 years, it's clear this isn't possible with you. I realized then that those words hadn't been a reason for leaving me. They had been a shield. A weapon to deflect attention away from himself. He had projected his shame onto me, branding me as the broken one, while he carried the truth in silence. I felt anger rise like fire in my chest. Not the kind of anger that explodes outward, but the kind that burns steadily, consuming everything in its path. The next day, I met Daniel for coffee. He noticed immediately that something was different. "You look lighter," he said cautiously. I let out a short laugh. Lighter? That's not what I'd call it. Try furious. He leaned forward, concern in his eyes. What happened? I took a deep breath. I found out the truth. About Ethan. He wasn't just blaming me all those years. He wasn't just walking away because of my fibroids. He couldn't have kids either. He knew, Daniel. He knew the whole time. Daniel's jaw tightened. He sat back slowly, shaking his head. Unbelievable. I carried that guilt for years, I continued, my voice trembling. Every doctor visit, every failed treatment, every prayer, I thought it was my fault. I thought I had failed as a wife. And he just let me believe it. He let me carry that shame so he wouldn't have to. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand, his grip steady. Clara. That's not just betrayal. That's cruelty. He didn't just leave you, he crushed you under a lie. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of clarity. Tears of release. You know what the worst part is? I whispered. If I had known the truth back then, I wouldn't have left him. I would have stayed. I would have fought with him. Because that's what marriage is. You face things together. But he didn't want that. He didn't want a partner. He wanted someone to blame. Daniel squeezed my hand. And that's why you're better off without him. I nodded, my throat tight. For the first time, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like the discarded wife who had failed her husband. I felt like the survivor of a lie that wasn't mine to begin with. In the days that followed, news spread quickly. People who had once whispered behind my back now whispered about Ethan. The story was out, his infertility, Vanessa's affair, the collapse of his perfect life. And me? I didn't have to defend myself anymore. The truth had done it for me. One evening, as I was washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older, yes, but stronger. Her shoulders were straighter. Her eyes were clearer. I whispered to her, "It was never you. It was never your fault." And for the first time in 10 years, I believed it. But just when I thought the story had finally ended, there was one last twist waiting for me. Because Ethan wasn't done. Not yet. I thought the truth was enough, that knowing I wasn't the problem would finally set me free. But then Ethan came crawling back. And what he asked of me, you won't believe. If you discovered years later that it wasn't your fault, that the blame had been unfair all along, how would you feel, angry, relieved, or both? Share your thoughts in the comments. I thought the truth was the ending. When Sophie told me about Ethan's infertility, when Daniel reminded me that a man who hides behind lies is no man at all, I thought that was it. The book was closed. But then, on a quiet Wednesday evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. It wasn't saved in my contacts anymore. But something about it made my stomach drop. Against my better judgment, I answered. Clara? My chest tightened. It was his voice. Ethan. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat went dry, and the memories came rushing back: the anniversary dinner that went cold, the lawyer's shoes in my hallway, the sting of those divorce papers. "What do you want, Ethan?" I finally managed, my voice flat. There was silence on the other end. Then he sighed, long and heavy. I made a mistake." I laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a cough. "Which one? Leaving me through a lawyer? Blaming me for years for something that wasn't my fault? Or marrying someone who cheated on you?" He flinched at my words. I could hear it in the pause that followed. "Clara, please. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but just hear me out. Vanessa and we're done. She filed for divorce. She took the house, the car, everything. And the child, well, you know the truth about that already." His voice cracked. "I'm alone. I've lost everything." I closed my eyes, shaking my head slowly. "And you think what, Ethan? That you can just come back here? Pick up where you left off? Like the last 3 years never happened?" "I know it's insane," he said quickly. "I know I hurt you more than anyone ever should. But Clara, when I think about everything we went through, our life together, I realize you were the only person who ever truly stood by me. I see that now." His words might have pierced me years ago. They might have shattered me into pieces. But now, they slid off like water on glass. "Do you even hear yourself?" I whispered. "You let me believe I was broken. You let me drown in shame while you hid the truth. And now that your shiny new life crumbled, you want to come back to the woman you discarded like trash?" "I was scared," he said desperately. "I was ashamed. I couldn't face the truth about myself. It was easier to blame you. Easier to start over with someone else than admit what I knew deep down." His honesty stung, but it didn't soften me. It only made the picture clearer. Ethan hadn't just been selfish, he had been cowardly. I straightened in my chair, my voice steady. "You're right about one thing. I did stand by you. Through everything. Through the surgeries, the doctor's visits, the tears. And you left me anyway. You abandoned me at my lowest. So tell me, Ethan, why on earth would I ever let you back into my life now?" There was silence on the line. I imagined him sitting in some empty apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered that night on our anniversary, sitting alone in a dress, candles melting down to wax, food growing cold while I waited for a man who had already decided to leave me. And the pity vanished. "I don't need you anymore," I said firmly. "I don't need your apologies. I don't need your regret. I built a life without you, Ethan. And it's a better life than anything I ever had with you." I could hear him breathing on the other end, shallow and shaky. "So that's it? You won't even consider it?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "That's it." I ended the call before he could say another word. For a moment, I just sat there in the quiet, phone still in my hand. My heart wasn't racing. My chest wasn't tight. Instead, I felt free. Truly free. Later that week, I told Daniel what had happened. We were walking in the park, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the path. Grace ran ahead, chasing after a dog with a stick, her laughter echoing in the air. When I told him Ethan had called, Daniel didn't even blink. "And what did you say?" he asked. I told him no, I said simply. Daniel smiled, that warm, steady smile I'd grown to love. "Good. Because you deserve more than someone who only sees your worth after losing everything else." I looked at him then, really looked at him. At the man who had listened to me, who had believed me, who had reminded me that I was not broken. And I realized something. Ethan's betrayal hadn't defined me. It had freed me. If he had never left, I might still be stuck in that cold marriage, still shrinking under the weight of blame that wasn't mine. But because he left, because he lied, because he tried to erase me, I had been forced to rebuild. And in rebuilding, I had found myself again. As Grace came running back, her cheeks flushed from laughter, Daniel reached for my hand. I took it without hesitation. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because a man held my hand. Not because I had replaced Ethan with someone else. But because I had chosen myself. I had chosen peace. I had chosen truth. And I had chosen to never again carry a burden that wasn't mine to bear. And that was the moment I knew I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him to suffer. His downfall was enough. The real victory was living free, living true, and never again apologizing for something that was never my fault. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Would you have given Ethan a second chance, or walked away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you can keep receiving more stories like this.